Why is it so big? I can't take it anymore." The maid moaned to the mafia boss. The vibrating phone on the scratch laminate counter felt like a countdown to a bomb detonation. Emma Cole stared at the screen, her eyes gritty from lack of sleep and the lingering smell of stale espresso grounds clinging to her hair. It was another unknown number. Likely another debt collector chasing the ghosts of the medical bills that had swallowed her life whole. She was 26 years old, and she felt ancient. Emma ignored the call. Turning back to the sink of her cramped apartment, the faucet dripped with a rhythmic, maddening sound that echoed the pounding in her temples. She had just finished a double shift at the coffee shop, and in 2 hours, she had to clock in at the 24-hour grocery store 3 miles away. Her mother, lying in a hospital bed across town, was the only reason Emma was still standing. But standing was becoming harder every day. She dried her hands on a rag and picked up the stack of mail she had been avoiding. The envelope on top was from the hospital billing department. She did not need to open it to know what it said. The treatments were working, but the cost was astronomical. They were threatening to transfer her mother to a state facility if the balance was not brought down by the end of the month. Desperation. Cold and sharp, twisted in her stomach, she needed money, not the minimum wage scraps she was scraping together, but real money. She sat on the edge of her sagging mattress and opened her laptop, the screen flickering before settling into a dull glow. She refreshed the job board she checked every hour. Most were scams or dead ends. But then, a new listing popped up near the top. Private estate housekeeper needed, live-in, discreet, high salary. Emma blinked. The figure listed for the weekly stipend was more than she made in a month at both her current jobs combined. It seemed impossible. She clicked the details. The location was an estate on the outskirts of Ravensfield, a city known for its steel mills and its secrets. There were no requirements for a degree, only a demand for perfection. Silence, and a background check. She applied immediately. The next day at the coffee shop, while wiping down the steaming wand of the espresso machine, she mentioned the address to her coworker. Sarah froze, the pitcher of milk in her hand hovering in midair. "You are kidding, right?" Sarah asked, her voice dropping to a whisper. "No," Emma said, scrubbing a stubborn stain of dried milk. "They called me back this morning. I have an interview in an hour." "Emma," Sarah hissed, leaning over the counter, "that is the Moretti estate. You know who they are, don't you? People whisper about that family. They are not just rich, they are dangerous. My cousin used to deliver packages out that way. He said there are men with guns at the gate. Real guns." Emma paused. She knew the rumors. Everyone in Ravensfield knew the name Moretti. They were the shadow that hung over the city, the reason certain construction contracts were approved overnight, and why some shopkeepers paid for protection. But then she thought of her mother's pale face against the hospital pillow, the way her hand trembled when she reached for a cup of water. "I do not have a choice." "Sarah," Emma said quietly, "they are offering $5,000 a month just to start." Sarah looked at her with pity, shaking her head. "Just be careful. If things feel wrong, you run. You hear me?" Emma nodded, but she knew she would not run. She could not afford to run. The drive to the outskirts of Ravensfield took 40 minutes. The landscape shifted from the gray, clustered tenements of the city to rolling hills and dense, dark forests. The Moretti estate was a fortress hidden behind high stone walls, topped with iron spikes. When Emma pulled her battered sedan up to the intercom, a camera swiveled to focus on her face. "Name," a voice crackled. "Emma Cole. I am here for an interview." The heavy iron gates groaned open. As she drove up the long, winding driveway, she saw them. Men in dark suits standing at intervals along the perimeter. They were not looking at their phones or chatting. They were watching the tree line, their postures rigid. Sarah was right. This was not a home. It was a stronghold. The mansion itself was terrifyingly beautiful. It was a sprawling structure of dark stone and glass, looming against the overcast sky like a monument to power. Emma parked and walked to the massive front doors. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. A severe-looking woman in a gray suit answered the door and led her through a foyer that could have swallowed her entire apartment building. The silence was absolute. There was no music, no laughter, only the click of their heels on the black marble floors. "Mr. Moretti will see you now," the woman said, opening a set of double doors made of dark mahogany. Emma stepped inside. The office was vast, lined with floor-to-ceiling bookshelves and smelling of old paper and expensive scotch. Behind a massive desk sat a man who looked like he had been carved from the same dark stone as the house, Lorenzo Moretti. He did not look up immediately. He was reading a file, his brow furrowed in concentration. He was younger than she expected, perhaps in his early 30s, with jet-black hair swept back from a sharp, angular face. He wore a charcoal suit that fit him with lethal precision. "Sit," he commanded, his voice deep and smooth, without lifting his eyes from the page. Emma sat in the leather chair opposite him, clutching her purse. Finally. He closed the file and looked at her. His eyes were dark, intelligent, and unsettlingly cold. It felt as though he was taking her apart, cataloging every fear and secret she held. "Emma Cole," he said. He. "Mother, Alice Cole, currently in the oncology ward at St. Jude S. Father deceased. You are currently working 2 jobs and are 3 months behind on your student loans." Emma felt the blood drain from her face. "How do you know all that?" "I know everything about the people I let into my home, Miss Cole," Lorenzo replied calmly. He leaned back, steepling his fingers. "I am not looking for a maid. I can hire a cleaning service for that. I am looking for a ghost, someone who can maintain this house without being seen, and without being heard, and most importantly, without asking questions." "I can do that," Emma said, her voice shaking slightly. "Can you?" Lorenzo asked, his gaze intensifying. "This house operates on strict rules. You will never enter the East Wing unless specifically instructed. You will never invite guests. You will never speak to the other staff about what happens in this office. And if I call for you, regardless of the hour, you answer." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle on her. "If you breach confidentiality, you will be terminated immediately. And in my world, termination has lasting consequences. Do you understand? The threat was veiled, but it was there, sharp as a razor." Emma looked at his hands, large, strong hands that looked capable of violence and control in equal measure. She felt a strange shiver that was half fear, half something electric she could not name. She looked back into his eyes. "I understand, Mr. Moretti. I need this job. I will not let you down." Lorenzo studied her for a long moment. Then he slid a single sheet of paper across the desk. "A contract. Sign it." Emma picked up the heavy fountain pen. Her hand trembled as she hovered over the signature line. It felt like she was signing away her freedom, selling a piece of her soul for the sake of survival. She thought of the hospital bills. She pressed the pen to the paper and signed. "Welcome to Ravensfield Manor," Lorenzo said, taking the paper back. He did not smile. The first week was a blur of exhaustion and anxiety. The mansion was too big for one person to clean, but the pay was real. Emma scrubbed floors, polished silver, and dusted rooms that looked like they had not been entered in decades. She quickly learned that the house had secrets. While cleaning the windows in the main hallway, she realized the glass was thicker than normal, bulletproof. Discreet cameras were tucked into the corners of the crown molding, their red lights blinking in the shadows. On her 4th day, she was mopping the foyer near the main entrance when she saw it, a faint, reddish-brown smear on the pristine white marble, near the base of a decorative urn. It looked like someone had tried to scrub it away in a hurry but missed a spot. Emma froze, the mop handle slippery in her grip. Blood. It was definitely blood. She looked around, her heart racing. The house was silent. She quickly scrubbed the spot, putting her back into it until the marble was spotless again. As she worked, she felt a cold sweat prickling her neck. Sarah's warning echoed in her ears. Dangerous people. She finished the task and hurried to the kitchen, her hands shaking. She told herself it could have been anything, a nosebleed, a dropped glass of wine, but the metallic tang in the air told her otherwise. That evening, the atmosphere in the house shifted. The usual silence was replaced by a low, humming tension. Lorenzo had guests. Emma had been instructed to stay in her quarters when meetings were in session, but she had left her phone charger in the library earlier that day. Without thinking, she slipped out of her room and headed down the hallway. She heard voices coming from the dining room. They were not loud, but they carried a weight that made the air feel heavy. "We are not discussing the territory split until the shipment is secure." Lorenzo's voice cut through the air, icy and final. Emma rounded the corner and froze. The double doors to the dining room were wide open. Lorenzo sat at the head of the long table. He had removed his suit jacket, his white shirt rolled up to the elbows. Around the table sat 5 men. They were rough-looking, with scars and tattoos peeking out from under expensive collars. One of them had a gun holstered openly on his hip. The man with the gun stopped talking mid-sentence. All heads turned towards the doorway. Emma stood paralyzed. She was wearing her simple gray uniform, clutching her phone charger against her chest like a shield. Lorenzo slowly turned his head. His eyes met hers, and the temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. There was no recognition in his gaze, only a cold, deadly assessment. For a second, nobody breathed. The violence in the room was a coiled spring ready to snap. "Get out," Lorenzo said softly. Emma did not wait. She spun on her heel and sprinted back down the hallway, her heart thumping so hard she thought it would bruise her ribs. She practically threw herself into the kitchen, gasping for air. She braced herself against the granite counter, trembling. She had seen too much. She had broken the rules. He was going to fire her, or worse. She grabbed a glass and filled it with water from the tap, her hands shaking so badly the water splashed over the rim. She brought it to her lips, trying to drown the panic rising in her throat. "You should not have been there." Emma jumped, spinning around. Lorenzo was standing in the kitchen doorway. He moved so silently for a man of his size. He was still in his shirt sleeves, his expression unreadable. "I am sorry," Emma stammered, putting the glass down. I forgot my charger. I didn't mean to interrupt. I didn't see anything." Lorenzo walked further into the room. The kitchen was spacious, but suddenly it felt incredibly small. He stopped just a few feet from her. He looked tired. The harsh lines of his face were softened slightly by the dim lighting, but his eyes were still intense. He did not apologize for the men with guns. He did not explain. "This house is not like other houses. Emma," he said, his voice low. "Curiosity here is not a virtue. It is a liability." "I know," she whispered. "I won't do it again." Lorenzo looked at her, really looked at her, in a way that made her breath hitch. He took a step closer. He reached out, and for a terrifying second, she thought he was going to grab her. Instead, he took the glass of water she had set on the counter. He handed it back to her. "You are shaking." His fingers brushed against hers as he passed the glass. The contact was brief, but it sent a shockwave through her. His skin was warm, his grip steady. She looked up at him, her eyes wide. He was close enough that she could smell the scent of sandalwood and something sharper, like gunpowder. "Drink," he said. "You are safe here. Emma, as long as you follow my lead." She took a sip, watching him over the rim of the glass. The fear was still there, but beneath it was something else. A pull. A magnetic gravity that drew her toward the danger he represented. Lorenzo held her gaze for a moment longer, then turned and walked out of the kitchen without another word. Emma let out a breath she didn't know she was holding. The next afternoon, Emma was assigned to prepare one of the guest suites in the West Wing. It was a massive room with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the entire estate. She stripped the bed, changing the linens with mechanical efficiency. Her mind was racing. The money she had sent to the hospital that morning had kept the collectors at bay, but the doctor had called with news of a new, experimental treatment that cost more than she could make in a year. She walked to the window, pressing her forehead against the cool glass. Below, the estate stretched out for acres. Manicured lawns, the dark forest beyond, the high walls that kept the world out and the secrets in. It was a golden cage. She felt the weight of it all pressing down on her shoulders. The debt, Her mother's illness, the men with guns in the dining room, the terrifying man who signed her paychecks. It was suffocating. She closed her eyes and let out a long, ragged sigh. "Why is it so big?" she muttered to the empty room, her voice cracking with exhaustion. "I can't take it anymore." She meant the mansion. She meant the burden of her life. Speaking to yourself is the first sign of madness. Emma spun around, her face flushing crimson. Lorenzo was leaning against the doorframe, his arms crossed over his chest. He was wearing a black dress shirt, the top button undone. He had clearly been watching her for a moment. There was a faint, unexpected smirk playing on his lips. I was just," Emma stammered, realizing how her words must have sounded. Lorenzo pushed off the doorframe and walked slowly into the room. The amusement in his eyes danced with something darker, referring to the house. "I assume?" he asked, his voice dropping an octave. The double meaning hung in the air between them, thick and heavy. Emma's cheeks burned. She knew he was teasing her, using her embarrassment to assert control, but there was a current of tension underneath it that made her knees weak. "Yes," she managed to say, struggling to keep her voice steady. "The house. It is a lot to manage." Lorenzo stopped a few feet away, invading her personal space just enough to be unsettling. He looked down at her, his smirk fading into a look of intense scrutiny. "It is a lot to handle," he agreed softly, "but you seem to be managing better than most." He let the moment linger, the silence stretching until it felt like a physical touch. Emma felt exposed, as if he could see the desperate, pounding rhythm of her heart. "Finish the room," he said abruptly, the professional mask sliding back into place. "I have guests arriving at 8. He turned and walked away, his footsteps silent on the plush carpet. That night, Emma lay alone in her small staff bedroom. The sheets were crisp and clean, a luxury she was not used to, but she could not sleep. She stared at the ceiling, replaying the day in her mind. She thought about the blood on the floor, the gun on the hip of the man in the dining room, the way Lorenzo had looked at her in the kitchen, and the teasing glint in his eyes in the guest room. She was terrified. She knew that reasonable people ran from situations like this. But then she remembered the way Lorenzo's voice had softened when he told her she was safe. She remembered the warmth of his hand. She rolled over, pulling the duvet up to her chin. She wondered if she had made a terrible mistake coming here. Or if, perhaps, this dangerous, terrifying house was the only way out of the life that was slowly crushing her. Outside, the wind howled against the stone walls, but inside, the house was silent, waiting. Emma closed her eyes, but sleep did not come. 3 weeks had passed since Emma signed her life away on a sheet of heavy cream linen paper, and Ravensfield Manor had swallowed her whole. The fear that had initially choked her had not disappeared, but it had changed shape. It had transformed into a wary, breathing routine. Emma learned the rhythm of the house, a heartbeat that was slow, silent, and nocturnal. She learned that the floorboards on the second landing creaked if you stepped in the center, so she walked on the edges. She learned that the guards changed shifts at 6 in the morning and 6 in the evening, a seamless transfer of lethal responsibility that happened with military precision. Most of all, she learned Lorenzo Moretti. She did not know him, not really, but she knew his ghosts. She knew he took his coffee black, no sugar, brewed at exactly 190 degrees. If it was a degree cooler, he would not drink it. He would simply leave the cup on the coaster, a silent testament to imperfection. She knew he rarely slept. When she rose at 4 in the morning to start the laundry, she often saw the light under his office door still burning. Sometimes, when the house was suffocatingly quiet, she would see him standing on the sprawling stone balcony of the West Wing. He would be motionless, a dark silhouette against the gray skyline of Ravensfield, staring down at the city lights as if they were enemy encampments on a battlefield. He looked like a king who hated his kingdom. Emma tried to make herself invisible, moving through the rooms like a phantom, scrubbing away the dust and the tension, but she felt his eyes on her. When she poured his water during dinner, when she polished the mahogany banisters, She felt the weight of his gaze. It was not predatory. Exactly, it was analytical. He watched her the way a wolf watches a deer that has wandered too close to the den, curious, territorial, and entirely unreadable. One Tuesday afternoon, the house felt heavier than usual. The sky outside was a bruised purple, threatening a storm that had been building for days. Emma was dusting the hallway leading to Lorenzo's private study, a task she usually dreaded. The air here always felt colder, charged with the static of the decisions made behind the double oak doors. As she ran her feather duster along the intricate molding of a massive bookshelf, she noticed something odd. One of the heavy wooden panels was misaligned. It was not just a panel, it was a concealed door, slightly ajar. Emma froze. The first rule of her employment echoed in her head. No entering locked rooms, but this room was not locked. It was open. Curiosity, that dangerous thing Lorenzo had warned her about, pulled at her chest. She glanced down the hallway. Empty. The guards were at the perimeter. The house was silent. She pushed the bookshelf. It swung inward on silent hinges, revealing a small, windowless room that smelled of cedar and old paper. It was not a dungeon or an armory, as her imagination had conjured. It was a shrine. Shelves lined the walls, filled with files and leather-bound journals. But it was the table in the center that drew her in. It was covered in memorabilia, military medals in velvet cases, a tarnished silver lighter, and framed photographs. Emma stepped closer, her heart hammering against her ribs. She picked up a silver frame. The photo was old, the colors slightly faded. It showed a young man who looked like Lorenzo, but his face was unlined, his eyes bright and crinkled with genuine laughter. His arm was draped around a beautiful woman with dark curls, and sitting on his shoulders was a little boy, maybe 7 years old, grinning a missing tooth grin. This was a Lorenzo she had never seen. This was a man who knew what happiness tasted like. "What are you doing?" The voice was a whip crack in the silence. Emma gasped, the frame slipping from her fingers. She fumbled and caught it just before it hit the floor, clutching it to her chest as she spun around. Lorenzo stood in the doorway. He was not wearing his jacket. His white shirt was unbuttoned at the collar, his sleeves rolled up to reveal muscular forearms. His face was a mask of cold fury. I am so sorry," Emma stammered, backing away until her legs hit the table. "The door was open. I was dusting. I didn't mean to pry." Lorenzo stepped into the room, closing the bookshelf behind him. The space instantly felt smaller. He walked toward her, his movements predatory and smooth. He took the photo frame from her trembling hands. He did not look at it. He looked at her. "I gave you rules, Emma," he said, his voice dangerously low. "I know," she whispered. "I'm sorry. I will leave. I will pack my things." She moved a step past him, expecting to be fired, expecting to be thrown out of the gates. But Lorenzo did not move. He blocked her path, looking down at the photograph in his hand. The anger in his posture seemed to drain away, replaced by a sudden, crushing exhaustion. He traced his thumb over the glass, over the face of the smiling woman. That was 10 years ago. He said, it sounded like he was speaking to the room, not to her. "Who are they?" Emma asked. The question slipped out before she could stop it. The fear was still there, but beneath it was a sudden surge of empathy for the wounded look in his eyes. Lorenzo looked up. For a moment, she thought he would yell. Instead, he let out a long breath. "My fiancée, Elena, and my brother, Matteo." The silence that followed was thick enough to choke on. Emma looked at the photo again. Seeing the ghosts now, "I didn't know," she said softly. "No one talks about them," Lorenzo said, placing the frame back on the table with reverent care. "It is forbidden." He looked at her then. And the barrier between them, the wall of boss and employee, predator and prey, thinned. He looked less like the head of a syndicate and more like a man who had been carrying a stone on his chest for a decade. "Go back to work." "Emma," he said, but the bite was gone from his tone. She fled the room, her heart aching in a way she could not explain. That night, the internal phone in her small bedroom buzzed. It was past 11. Emma picked it up. her pulse jumping. "Yes, Mr. Moretti? Come to my office. Bring the ledger for the household accounts." Emma threw a cardigan over her pajamas and grabbed the binder. She walked through the darkened house, the shadows stretching long and distorted on the walls. When she entered the office, Lorenzo was sitting behind his desk, a glass of amber liquid in his hand. The only light came from the green banker's lamp on the desk and the glow of the city through the window behind him. He did not ask for the ledger. He pointed to the leather chair opposite him. "Sit." Emma sat, placing the binder on her lap. Lorenzo swirled the liquid in his glass, staring at the vortex. "You saw the file on the desk in the hidden room, didn't you?" he asked. "I saw a few papers," she admitted. "I didn't read them." Lorenzo took a drink. "It wasn't an accident. The car crash that killed them?" Emma went still. "It was a drive-by," he continued, his voice void of emotion, which made it all the more terrifying. "I was the target. I was supposed to be in the car, but I was late." Matteo took the wheel. Elena was in the passenger seat. They were collateral damage in a war I didn't even know had started. He looked up at her, his eyes dark pools of torment. "I buried them on a Tuesday. It was raining. I remember thinking that the rain should be louder, that it should drown out the sound of the dirt hitting the caskets. But it was quiet." Emma felt tears prick her eyes. She forgot the danger. She forgot who he was. She only saw the pain radiating off him in waves. "Lorenzo," she whispered. "It wasn't your fault, wasn't it?" he asked, a bitter laugh escaping his lips. "I inherited this life, Emma, but I chose to stay. I chose to fight, and they paid the price for my name." He looked at his hand, the hand that held the power of life and death over half the city, and curled it into a fist on the mahogany desk. Emma stood up. She did not think. She moved around the desk and stood beside his chair. Slowly, tentatively, she reached out and placed her hand over his fist. His skin was rough, hot to the touch. The muscles in his forearm were rock hard, coiled with tension. When her palm touched his knuckles, he flinched, as if he had been burned. But he did not pull away. Emma let her hand rest there, a silent anchor. "I am so sorry," she said again. Lorenzo stared at her hand. It looked small and pale against his scarred skin. Slowly, his fist unclenched, he turned his hand over, palm up, and his fingers brushed against her wrist. His thumb swept across her knuckles, a feather-light touch that sent a jolt of electricity straight up her arm. For a moment, time stopped. The air in the room grew thin. Emma could feel the heat radiating from him. She looked down, and he looked up. Their eyes locked. In that gaze, there was a raw, terrifying hunger, not just for power, but for connection, for forgiveness, for something soft in a world of steel. His thumb caressed the inside of her wrist, right over her pulse point. Her heart was beating so fast she was sure he could feel it against his skin. Then, the mask slammed back into place. Lorenzo pulled his hand away abruptly, the loss of contact leaving her skin cold. He cleared his throat, turning his chair away from her. "Leave the ledger," he said, his voice rough. "Go to bed, Emma." Emma stood there for a second, her hand still hovering in the air. She felt dizzy, unbalanced by the sudden shift. "Good night, Mr. Moretti," she whispered. She left the office, but the sensation of his thumb on her wrist burned like a brand for hours. The next morning, the reality of her world crashed back in. Emma was taking the recycling out to the large bins near the back service gate. The morning mist was thick, clinging to the trees. As she tossed a cardboard box into the bin, a voice hissed from the other side of the iron fence. "Hey, pretty girl." Emma jumped, dropping the bin lid. A man was standing there. He was wearing a hooded sweatshirt, his face shadowed, but she could see the greasy sheen of his skin and the desperate look in his eyes. He did not look like the usual security guards. "You work for him, don't you?" the man said, leaning against the bars. The big man, Moretti. Emma took a step back. "I don't know what you were talking about. Don't play dumb," the man sneered. "We know you are the maid. We know about your mom, too. Alice, right? St. Jude S. Room 412. Ice water flooded Emma's veins. "Leave my mother out of this," the man grinned. revealing yellowed teeth. "Tell you what, you keep your ears open in there. You hear anything about a shipment coming in on the docks next week, you let us know. Maybe we can help with those hospital bills. Or maybe something happens to the machines keeping Mommy alive." Emma opened her mouth to scream, but before she could, two shadows materialized from the woods. Moretti's guards. "Hey!" one of them shouted, raising an assault rifle. The stranger's eyes went wide. He scrambled back, turned, and sprinted into the tree line. The guards gave chase, disappearing into the mist. Emma sank to her knees on the damp pavement, shaking so hard her teeth chattered. 10 minutes later, she was in the kitchen, clutching a mug of tea she couldn't bring to her lips. The back door flew open. Lorenzo stormed in. He looked like a thunderstorm personified. He was wearing a suit, but his tie was gone, and his eyes were blazing with a terrifying light. "Did he touch you?" Lorenzo demanded, marching across the kitchen. Emma looked up, her eyes wide and wet. No, he spoke to me." Lorenzo stopped in front of her. He placed his hands on the counter on either side of her, trapping her in his space. He leaned down, his face inches from hers. "What did he say?" He knew about my mother," Emma whispered, a tear escaping and tracking down her cheek. He said if I didn't tell him about your business, he would hurt her." A low growl rumbled in Lorenzo's chest. It was a sound of pure, primal aggression. He pushed off the counter and paced a tight circle in the kitchen, running a hand through his hair. "He threatened you," he said, his voice lethal. "He threatened my household." He stopped pacing and looked at her. The anger in his face shifted, softening into something protective and fierce. He stepped back into her space. "Look at me. Emma?" She looked up. "No one touches you," he vowed, his voice vibrating with intensity. "No one touches your mother. Do you understand? You are under my protection, and God help the man who forgets that." He reached out, cupping her face in his large, warm hands. His thumbs brushed away the tear on her cheek. The gesture was so tender, so at odds with the violence in his voice, that Emma felt her breath hitch. "I will handle it," he said softly. "You are safe." Emma leaned into his touch instinctively, seeking the warmth. She felt safe. Yes, but looking into his dark, possessive eyes, she also felt something else. She was standing on the edge of a cliff, and she was terrified that she wanted to jump. That night, the storm finally broke. Rain lashed against the stone walls of the mansion like shrapnel. Thunder shook the foundation, rattling the windows in their frames. Emma was in the upstairs hallway, heading to check the linens, when the lights flickered once, twice. Then, darkness. The heavy, suffocating blackness of the countryside descended. A second later, the emergency alarms blared, a sharp, piercing shriek that made Emma scream and drop her basket. She pressed her back against the wall, her heart racing. The darkness felt alive. "Emma!" The voice cut through the alarm. A beam of light sliced through the hallway. Lorenzo was running toward her, a heavy tactical flashlight in one hand. He reached her in seconds, grabbing her arm. The backup generators are kicking in, but the surge tripped the main security grid. He yelled over the alarm, "Come with me." He didn't wait for an answer. He pulled her down the hall, his grip iron tight. He led her into his office and kicked the door shut. The alarm was muffled here, a dull drone in the background. The room was bathed in the ghostly blue glow of his computer monitors, which were running on independent battery backups. Outside, lightning flashed, illuminating Lorenzo's face in sharp relief. "Stay here," he ordered, moving to the window to check the locks, "until the systems reset. This is the safest room in the house." Emma stood in the center of the room, hugging herself. The adrenaline was fading, leaving her trembling. "I hate storms," she whispered. Lorenzo turned from the window. He set the flashlight on the desk, the beam pointing up at the ceiling, creating strange shadows. "It will pass," he said. He walked over to where she stood. The blue light from the screens reflected in his eyes. "You are shaking again," he noted. "I'm scared." "Lorenzo, not of the storm, of everything, of that man this morning. of my mother dying while I am stuck here." She hadn't meant to say it, but the darkness loosened her tongue. Lorenzo sighed, the sound weary. He pulled his desk chair over and gestured for her to sit. He pulled another chair close, sitting directly in front of her. Their knees almost touched. "I cannot fix the world, Emma," he said quietly. "But I can fix the man who threatened you. He has been dealt with." Emma looked at him. Knowing she shouldn't ask what dealt with meant, "I feel guilty." She confessed, looking down at her hands, "I am here, safe in this fortress, eating good food, sleeping in a soft bed, and she is alone in a hospital room. I feel like I am betraying her by surviving." Lorenzo was silent for a long moment, then he reached out. He tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear, his fingers lingering on the curve of her jaw. "Guilt is a useless emotion," he said, his voice rough. "It changes nothing. You are doing what you must to keep her alive. That is not betrayal. That is loyalty." He leaned closer. His scent, rain and cedar, filled her senses. "I know about guilt, Emma. I know about watching people you love become targets just because they are close to you." His fingers grazed her cheek, tracing the line of her jaw. His touch was hypnotic. The storm outside seemed to fade away, leaving only the two of them in this bubble of blue light and tension. Emma's breathing grew shallow. She looked at his lips. They were parted slightly. "Lorenzo," she breathed. He went still. His eyes searched hers, looking for permission, or perhaps for a reason to stop. "You should not be in here," he murmured, but he did not pull away. "I don't want to be anywhere else." The admission hung between them. Lorenzo let out a low groan, a sound of defeat and desire. He leaned in. When his lips touched hers, it was tentative at first, a question asked in the dark. Emma's eyes fluttered shut. His lips were soft, warm, and tasting of the scotch he had been drinking. She responded, pressing closer, her hands finding the lapels of his shirt and gripping them tight. That small movement broke the dam. Lorenzo growled low in his throat and deepened the kiss. It wasn't gentle anymore. It was hungry. It was the kiss of a man who had been starving for years. One of his hands tangled in her hair, tilting her head back, while the other arm wrapped around her waist, pulling her flush against his hard body. Emma gasped into his mouth, opening to him. The kiss was consuming. It was fear and relief and passion all twisted into one. She felt the rough stubble of his jaw against her skin, felt the frantic beating of his heart against her chest. It was overwhelming, terrifying, and the most right thing she had ever felt. His hand slid down her back, pressing her closer, as if he wanted to merge their bodies into one. Emma melted against him, her head spinning. Bzzzt! The sharp, jarring sound of the phone on his desk cut through the air like a knife. Lorenzo froze. Emma pulled back, gasping for air, her lips swollen and tingling. The phone buzzed again. The security line. Lorenzo squeezed his eyes shut for a second, a look of profound pain crossing his face. Then he pulled away. The loss of his warmth was instant and brutal. He picked up the phone, his voice dropping instantly into a cold, commanding baritone. "Report." Emma stood up, her legs shaking. She wrapped her arms around herself, feeling flushed and exposed. She watched him as he listened to the voice on the other end. "Understood. Lock down the perimeter. No one in or out." He hung up the phone and looked at her. His chest was heaving slightly, the only sign of the storm that had just passed between them. "The grid is back up," he said. His voice was steady, businesslike, but his eyes were dark and wild. Emma nodded, unable to speak. "Go to your room. Emma, lock the door." She turned and walked to the door. Her hand hovered over the knob. She looked back at him. He was standing by the desk, watching her. He didn't say anything else, but the way he looked at her, like he wanted to drag her back and never let her go, told her everything. A line had been crossed. There was no going back now. Good night," she whispered. She slipped out into the hallway, leaving him alone in the blue dark. The morning sun that filtered through the heavy velvet drapes of the dining room did nothing to warm the chill that had settled between Emma and Lorenzo. The air in the mansion, usually quiet, now felt thick with unspoken words and the ghost of a kiss that neither of them had acknowledged since the security alarm broke them apart. Emma moved around the long mahogany table, collecting the breakfast service. Her hands trembled slightly as she reached for Lorenzo's empty espresso cup. He was sitting at the head of the table, reading a dossier on a tablet, his face a mask of stone. He did not look up, but as her hand brushed near his sleeve, she saw the muscles in his jaw tighten. "Thank you, Emma," he said. His voice was polite, distant, and utterly devoid of the heat that had been there the night before in the blue glow of his office. "You are welcome, Mr. Moretti," she replied, the formality tasting like ash in her mouth. She retreated to the kitchen, her chest tight. It was agonizing. Every time he entered a room, her heart would hammer against her ribs, anticipating a look, a word, something that acknowledged the line they had crossed, but he gave her nothing. He was the boss, and she was the maid, and the walls were back up, higher and fortified with razor wire, upstairs, in the master study. The atmosphere was different, but equally tense. Marco De Luca, Lorenzo's second-in-command, stood by the window, watching the driveway. Marco was a man who noticed everything, and the shift in the house's energy had not escaped him. "Lorenzo," Marco said, turning to face the desk where Lorenzo was signing authorization forms, "we have a problem." Lorenzo didn't pause his writing. "We have many problems, Marco. Be specific. The chatter on the street is changing," Marco said, his voice low. "The Rossi family is asking questions. They are asking about the new staff member, the one who lives in—" Lorenzo stopped writing. He slowly set the pen down. "They are asking about Emma? They are calling her a weakness," Marco said bluntly. "They are saying the Wolf of Ravensfield has gone soft. They think she is a way to get to you. You know how this works. If they think she matters to you, she becomes a target." Lorenzo stood up, walking over to the bank of monitors that displayed the security feeds. On one of the screens, Emma was in the library, dusting the shelves. She looked small, fragile, and completely out of place in his violent world. He watched her for a long moment, his expression darkening. "She is staff, Marco," Lorenzo said, though the words lacked conviction. "Is she?" Marco challenged. "I saw the way you looked at her when she came in this morning. You are checking the perimeter logs 3 times a night. You have never done that before. If you care about her, you need to be careful, or you need to send her away." Lorenzo glared at the screen. Send her away. The thought made his stomach clench. "She stays," Lorenzo said, his voice final. "Increase the surveillance. Put a second team on the gate, if anyone even looks at her sideways. I want to know." Marco nodded, knowing better than to argue, but the worry in his eyes remained. 2 hours later, Emma was in the dry storage room off the kitchen, taking inventory of the pantry supplies. Her phone buzzed in her apron pocket. It was the hospital. She answered it quickly, pressing the phone to her ear. "Hello? Is it my mom? Miss Cole, this is the billing administrator at St. Jude's." A sharp female voice said, "We have tried to reach you several times. Your mother's condition has deteriorated overnight. She requires an immediate transfer to the intensive care unit and a new round of stabilization drugs." "Oh, God," Emma gasped, gripping a shelf for support. "Is she okay?" "Please. Just do whatever she needs. We cannot proceed without payment." "Miss Cole," the administrator said coldly, "your insurance has capped out. The down payment for the ICU transfer is $15,000. We need it today, or we will have to transfer her to the state facility. They are not equipped to handle her specific case." Emma felt the blood drain from her face. $15,000? I don't have that. I just sent you everything I had. Please. I get paid next week. Can't you just wait? "I am sorry," the woman said. "Policy is policy. You have until 5 this afternoon to secure the funds." The line went dead. Emma dropped the phone. It clattered onto the concrete floor. She slid down against the metal shelving units, pulling her knees to her chest. The walls of the storage room seemed to be closing in on her. $15,000. It might as well have been 15 million. She was going to lose her mother because she was poor, because she had failed. A sob ripped through her throat, harsh and jagged. She buried her face in her hands, shaking violently, gasping for air as the panic attack took hold. She didn't hear the door open. She didn't hear the footsteps. "Emma?" The deep voice cut through the fog of her grief. She looked up, her vision blurred with tears. Lorenzo was standing in the doorway, framed by the light of the kitchen. He looked at her, crumpled on the floor, face wet, eyes red, and his mask shattered. He was across the room in 2 strides, crouching down in front of her. He didn't care about the dust on his suit trousers. "What happened?" he demanded, his voice urgent. "Are you hurt?" Emma shook her head, unable to speak. She tried to wipe her face, but the tears wouldn't stop. "Talk to me." "Emma," he ordered, but his tone was gentle. "My mom," she choked out. "She's getting worse. They need $15,000 by 5 o'clock, or they are going to move her. She won't survive the transfer. Lorenzo, she won't." She buried her face in her hands again, sobbing into her palms. Lorenzo went still. He looked at the woman falling apart in front of him, and a fierce, protective anger surged through him. It was a simple problem. Money. In his world, money was the easiest thing to solve. He reached out, taking her wrists and gently pulling her hands away from her face. "Look at me." Emma blinked, sniffing, and looked into his dark eyes. They were steady, anchoring her. "It is done," he said firmly. "What?" Emma whispered, confused. "I will take care of it," Lorenzo stated. "I will call the hospital administrator personally. Your mother will be moved to the VIP wing. She will get the treatment she needs. You do not need to worry about the money." Emma stared at him, shock momentarily stalling her tears. No, I can't let you do that. That is too much money. I can't pay you back. I am already in debt to you." "I'm not asking you to pay me back," Lorenzo said, his voice leaving no room for argument. "But why?" Emma asked, her voice trembling. "Why would you do that?" Lorenzo stood up, pulling her up with him. He held her arms to steady her. He looked down at her, his expression serious and intense. "You work in my house." "Emma, that makes you my responsibility." The words sent a shiver down her spine. It wasn't just a statement of employment, it was a claim, a declaration. My house, my responsibility, mine. He released her arms and pulled his phone from his pocket. "Go wash your face. I'm taking you to see her." 10 minutes later, Emma was sitting in the passenger seat of a sleek, black sedan. It wasn't the armored SUV he usually took. It was nondescript, blending in with the traffic. Lorenzo was driving. His hands relaxed on the leather steering wheel. He had dismissed his driver, insisting on taking her himself. The drive to the hospital was a blur. When they arrived, the change was instantaneous. The staff, who had been cold and dismissive on the phone, were suddenly deferential. Emma's mother was already being moved to a private suite with a view of the garden. Emma spent an hour by her mother's bedside. Holding her frail hand, her mother was sedated, sleeping peacefully for the first time in weeks. Lorenzo waited in the hallway, leaning against the wall, checking emails on his phone, a silent sentinel guarding the door. When Emma finally emerged, she looked exhausted, but lighter. The crushing weight had been lifted. She looked at Lorenzo, who straightened up as she approached. "Thank you," she whispered. "I don't know what to say." "Don't say anything," Lorenzo replied quietly. "Let's go home." The drive back to the estate was different. The sun had set, and the city lights blurred past the windows in streaks of gold and red. The silence in the car was heavy, but it wasn't awkward anymore. It was charged. They were acutely aware of the small space. Emma could smell his cologne, sandalwood and expensive tobacco. She watched his hands on the wheel, remembering how they had felt against her cheek. Lorenzo kept glancing at the rear-view mirror, his eyes narrowing. "Emma," he said, his voice dropping an octave. "Put your seatbelt on tighter." "What?" Emma asked, turning to look at him. "Don't ask questions, just do it." She tightened the strap. Lorenzo's knuckles were white on the steering wheel. He swerved the car suddenly into the left lane, speeding up, behind them. A dark SUV matched the move, its headlights blinding in the mirror. "Hold on," Lorenzo commanded. Suddenly, The SUV behind them surged forward, clipping the bumper of their sedan. Metal screeched against metal, a horrible, grinding sound. Emma screamed, grabbing the dashboard. "Get down!" Lorenzo roared. He yanked the wheel to the right, drifting the car around a sharp corner onto a side street. Crack! Crack! 2 gunshots rang out, loud and terrifying. The back window of the sedan shattered, showering the back seat in diamonds of safety glass. Lorenzo didn't hesitate. He took one hand off the wheel and shoved Emma's head down toward her knees, shielding her body with his own arm as he floored the accelerator. "Stay down! Don't look up!" The car engine roared as Lorenzo navigated the narrow alleyways with terrifying precision. He wasn't panic driving, he was driving with the cold, calculated skill of a man who had done this 100 times. He took 2 sharp lefts, then a right, weaving through the industrial district, confusing the pursuers. Emma was shaking, her face pressed against her knees, her hands covering her head. She could hear Lorenzo's heavy breathing, could feel the heat of his body leaning over her. After 5 minutes of tire-screeching turns, Lorenzo slowed the car. He checked the mirrors constantly. "We lost them," he said, his voice tight. He pulled the damaged car into the garage of a nondescript brick apartment building in a quiet neighborhood, miles away from the estate. The garage door rumbled shut behind them, plunging them into dim artificial light. Lorenzo killed the engine. The silence that followed was deafening. "Are you hurt?" he asked immediately, turning to her. He grabbed her shoulders, pulling her up so he could inspect her. "Is there glass on you?" I am okay," Emma stammered, her teeth chattering. "I'm okay." Lorenzo let out a breath, resting his forehead against the steering wheel for a second. Then he looked at her, his eyes wild. "We cannot go back to the mansion. They will be watching the main roads. We have to stay here until Marco clears the perimeter." He got out of the car and opened her door, helping her out. His grip was firm, reassuring. He led her up a flight of concrete stairs to a heavy steel door. He punched a code into the keypad, and the door clicked open. The safe house was nothing like the mansion. It was a small, modest apartment with beige walls, worn furniture, and a single window covered by thick blackout curtains. It looked like a place where a normal person lived, not a mafia boss. Lorenzo locked the door behind them, throwing the deadbolt. He tossed his keys on the small kitchen table and took off his suit jacket, throwing it over a chair. He paced the small living room, checking the window, his energy vibrating off the walls. In this small space, he seemed stripped of his armor. The aura of the untouchable kingpin was gone. He was just a man with a gun holstered at his waist, exhaustion in his eyes, and a thin line of blood trickling down his temple. "Lorenzo," Emma said, her voice shaking. "You are bleeding." Lorenzo touched his forehead, pulling his fingers away, red. "It's nothing. A piece of glass from the rearview mirror." "Sit down," Emma said, her shock giving way to a need to do something. "Anything useful. Please. Let me help." Lorenzo looked at her, then nodded. He sat on the edge of the worn sofa, his shoulders slumping slightly. Emma found a first aid kit under the bathroom sink. She came back and stood between his spread knees. She dampened a cloth and gently dabbed at the cut on his forehead. He hissed a breath through his teeth, but didn't pull away. "I am sorry," she whispered, her hands trembling as she cleaned the wound. This is insane. People were shooting at us." Lorenzo watched her face as she worked. His eyes were dark, intense, tracking every movement of her lashes, every tremor in her lip. "They were shooting at me." "Emma," he corrected her softly. "You were just in the car." He reached up, his hand catching her wrist, stopping her ministrations. Emma stopped, the cloth hovering near his temple. She looked down at him. He was so close. She could feel his breath on her stomach. She could see the gold flecks in his dark irises. "I haven't felt fear like that in 10 years, Lorenzo admitted, his voice rough. "When I heard the glass break, when I thought for a second that I might have gotten you killed." He squeezed her wrist, his thumb rubbing the pulse point. "I am terrified of losing you. Emma, I thought I was done with fear. I thought I had nothing left to lose, but I was wrong." Emma's heart skipped a beat. She set the cloth down on the coffee table without looking away from him. She stepped closer, closing the inch of space between them. She placed her hands on his cheeks, her thumbs stroking his high cheekbones. "I am scared too," she whispered, "but I am here. I am not hurt, and I don't want to leave you. Lorenzo, even with the guns, even with the danger, I don't want to be anywhere else." Lorenzo let out a ragged sound, part groan, part prayer. He pulled her down, their foreheads touched, resting there for a moment, breathing the same air. The tension in the room snapped. When he kissed her, it wasn't tentative. It was a collision. Lorenzo buried his hands in her hair, pulling her mouth to his. Emma made a soft sound of surrender, wrapping her arms around his neck, pulling him closer. They kissed with a desperate urgency, trying to erase the fear of the last hour, trying to prove to each other that they were alive. The kiss deepened, becoming hungry and possessive. Lorenzo's hands slid down her back, pressing her body against his chest. Emma could feel the pounding of his heart through his shirt, matching the frantic rhythm of her own. He stood up, lifting her effortlessly as he did. Emma wrapped her legs around his waist, needing to be as close to him as possible. He carried her toward the bedroom, their lips never breaking contact. The world outside, the gunmen, the debts, the mansion, the rules, all of it faded away. In this small, dark apartment, there was only the warmth of his skin, the taste of his mouth, and the desperate, undeniable truth that they belonged to each other. Lorenzo kicked the bedroom door shut behind them, sealing them in the darkness. He lowered her onto the bed, following her down, his weight heavy and comforting. He braced himself on his elbows, framing her face, looking down at her with a raw vulnerability that stole the breath from her lungs. "You are mine," he whispered against her lips, a vow and a plea all in one. "Yours," she breathed back. He kissed her again, slow and deep, and the shadows of the room rose up to meet them, wrapping them in a protective embrace as the rest of the world burned. The morning light filtering through the thin curtains of the safe house bedroom was gray and diffused, lacking the golden warmth of the mansion. But to Emma, it felt like the most honest light she had ever seen. She woke slowly, the memory of the night before washing over her not with shame, but with a profound sense of clarity. She rolled over, expecting to find the other side of the mattress empty, and she was right. Lorenzo was not in bed. He was sitting in a worn armchair near the window, fully dressed in his trousers and a fresh white shirt he must have found in the emergency supplies. He was watching her. There was no guard up, no mask of the ruthless syndicate boss. His elbows rested on his knees, his hands clasped loosely, and his expression was terrifyingly open. It held a softness that seemed foreign on his sharp features, a look of wonder mixed with a deep, encroaching sadness. "Good morning," Emma whispered, her voice husky with sleep. Lorenzo did not smile, but his eyes crinkled at the corners. "Good morning." He stood up and walked to the edge of the bed. He sat down, the mattress dipping under his weight, and reached out to brush a stray hair from her forehead. His touch was reverent. "We have to go back soon," he said quietly. "Marco has cleared the route. The estate is locked down." Emma sat up, pulling the sheet around her, suddenly aware of the reality waiting outside that door. She covered his hand with hers, pressing it against her cheek. "I am not afraid, Lorenzo." "You should be," he replied, his voice rough. He looked down at their joined hands. "Last night, it was something I never thought I would have. But my world is a poison. Emma, it destroys everything I touch. I am terrified that by loving you, I have just painted a target on your back." Emma looked at him, seeing the guilt warring with the affection. "We will figure it out," she said firmly. "You are not alone in this anymore." Lorenzo looked at her for a long moment, as if trying to memorize her face, before nodding once. He stood up, the mask sliding back into place, though it didn't fit quite as tightly as before. "Get dressed. We leave in 10 minutes." The return to the mansion felt like re-entering a fortress under siege. The gates were reinforced, the number of guards had doubled, and the atmosphere inside was vibrating with tension. But amidst the preparations for war, the dynamic between Emma and Lorenzo had shifted irrevocably. In the kitchen that afternoon, The staff moved with efficient nervousness. Emma was brewing coffee, the familiar ritual grounding her. When she turned to pour a cup, she found Lorenzo standing right behind her. Usually, he would wait in the doorway or have a guard fetch it. Now, he was in her personal space, radiating heat. "Is that for me?" he asked, his voice low. Emma nodded, handing him the porcelain cup. Their fingers brushed, a lingering contact that lasted 3 seconds too long. Lorenzo didn't pull away. He looked into her eyes, ignoring the chef chopping vegetables a few feet away, and took a sip while holding her gaze. "Thank you," he murmured. He turned and left, but the damage was done. The kitchen staff exchanged looks. Some of the younger maids smiled, sensing the romance like a soap opera coming to life. But the older staff, like Mrs. Higgins, the head housekeeper, looked pale. They knew the history of the Moretti family. They knew that women who got close to the boss usually ended up as tragedies, not fairy tales. Upstairs in the main study, reality was far less romantic. Marco DeLuca was pacing the length of the Persian rug, a stack of surveillance photos in his hand. "You are being reckless, Lorenzo," Marco said, seeing slamming the photos down on the desk. Lorenzo sat behind the massive oak desk. "Unbothered. I am being careful." "No, you are being human, and that is dangerous," Marco countered. "The Rossi cartel has been chattering. We intercepted a call this morning. They are not just talking about the business anymore. They are talking about the maid. They know her name. Lorenzo. They know she was in the car with you." Lorenzo's hand clenched around his pen, the plastic creaking under the pressure. "They see her as leverage," Marco continued ruthlessly. "They think if they squeeze her, you will break. And looking at you today, looking at how you are following her around this house, I think they are right." Lorenzo stood up abruptly, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. "That is enough." "Marco." "Is it?" Marco pressed. "If you want her to live, you need to get her out of here. Send her away. Send her to the safe house in Zurich. Send her anywhere but here, because if she stays, she is going to get hurt. And this time, you might not be fast enough to stop a bullet." Lorenzo walked to the window, staring out at the gray sky. His reflection in the glass looked haunted. "I know," he whispered. "I know." Emma was walking down the hallway toward the library, carrying a stack of fresh linens, when she heard the voices drifting from the slightly open door of the study. She knew she should keep walking. She knew eavesdropping was what got her into trouble in the first place, but the tone of Lorenzo's voice froze her in her tracks. "Prepare the jet," Lorenzo said. His voice sounded dead. "We will move her tonight. She goes to Switzerland. I will set up an account for her. She will never have to work again, but she cannot be here." "But will she go willingly?" Marco asked. "It does not matter what she wants," Lorenzo replied, his voice hardening. "It matters that she breathes. I will force her if I have to. It is for her own safety." Emma felt the blood drain from her face. The linen stack slipped from her hands, hitting the floor with a soft thud. She didn't care about the noise. She didn't care about the rules. A hot, blinding fury surged through her, overriding the fear. He was doing it again. He was deciding her life for her, treating her like a pawn on his chessboard, a problem to be solved rather than a person. She marched to the study doors and shoved them open. Both men spun around. Marco looked surprised, but Lorenzo looked stricken. "Emma," Lorenzo started, taking a step toward her. "Don't," she snapped, stepping into the room. "Don't you dare come near me. Marco, give us a minute," Lorenzo commanded without looking away from Emma. Marco nodded and slipped past Emma, closing the doors behind him. The silence that followed was suffocating. Lorenzo walked around the desk, his hands raised in a placating gesture. "How much did you hear?" he asked. "Enough to know that you are planning to ship me off like a crate of contraband," Emma shouted. Her voice shook, not with fear, but with indignation. "You were going to send me to Switzerland? Without even asking me? I am trying to keep you alive," Lorenzo roared back, his calm facade shattering. "Do you have any idea what these people do? Do you know what they will do to you if they get their hands on you? I don't care about them. I care about you," Emma yelled, tears springing to her eyes. "I care that you think you have the right to control my life. I am not a child, Lorenzo, and I am not your property. You don't get to decide where I go or how I live. I have to decide, Lorenzo countered, closing the distance between them, because if I let you choose, you will choose to stay. And if you stay, they will use you to destroy me. Let them try, Emma argued, poking him in the chest. We can fight them, but you don't get to push me away to save yourself the pain of worrying about me. I am not doing it for me. Lorenzo grabbed her shoulders, his grip tight, desperate. I am doing it because I cannot watch you die. I cannot survive that. Emma, I have buried everyone I have ever loved. My father, my mother, Elena, Matteo. I cannot bury you too. The room fell silent. The raw confession hung in the air, heavy and electric. Emma looked up at him. His eyes were wild, wide with panic and a depth of emotion she had never seen before. He wasn't the Mafia Don in that moment. He was a terrified man standing in the ruins of his past. Lorenzo, she whispered, her anger dissolving into heartache. Lorenzo's breathing was ragged. He stared at her, his chest heaving. You are the only good thing that has happened to me in 10 years, he choked out, and because of that, you are in danger. I love you too much to let you be a casualty of my war. The word hung there. Love. He had said it. Emma let out a soft sob. The fight went out of her legs. She slumped forward, and Lorenzo caught her instantly, wrapping his arms around her with crushing force. I love you, she cried into his chest, clutching his lapels. Don't send me away. Please, I would rather be in danger with you than safe without you. Lorenzo buried his face in her neck, inhaling sharply. He was shaking. You are a fool, he murmured, his voice thick with emotion. A beautiful, stubborn fool. I learned from the best, she retorted weakly. Lorenzo pulled back just enough to look at her face. He brought his hands up to cup her cheeks, his thumbs brushing away the angry tears that still clung to her lashes. I am sorry, he whispered. I am so sorry. I don't know how to do this. I don't know how to protect you without locking you away. Just love me, Emma said. That is all I need. Lorenzo let out a groan, a sound of surrender. He leaned down and kissed her. This kiss was different from the one in the safe house. That had been desperate, fueled by adrenaline. This was fueled by a deep, aching need. It was an apology and a vow. It was fierce and possessive. Emma melted into him, her hands sliding up his chest to wrap around his neck. Lorenzo swept everything off the edge of his desk, files, lamp, the expensive pen. It all crashed to the floor, but neither of them flinched. He lifted her up, setting her on the edge of the mahogany surface, stepping between her legs to be closer. The dim light of the office wrapped around them. Outside, the guards patrolled with guns, but in here, the only war was the one they were fighting against their own fears. Lorenzo's hands were everywhere, roaming over her back, her waist, tangling in her hair. He kissed her jaw, her throat, murmuring her name like a prayer. Emma arched into him, her fingers gripping his shirt, pulling him closer, needing to feel the solid reality of him. There was a frantic energy to their movements, a need to bridge the gap that his secrets had created. Buttons were undone with fumbling. Eager fingers, shirts were pushed aside, skin met skin, hot and electric. Lorenzo paused for a second, his forehead resting against hers, his breathing heavy. Are you sure? He asked, his voice rough with restraint. If we do this, if you stay, there is no going back. You are part of this life, part of me, I am sure. Emma breathed, pulling him back to her. I am yours, Lorenzo. The last wall between them crumbled. They came together in a tangle of limbs and emotions. It was passionate and intense, a physical manifestation of the trust they had just fought for. The room was filled with soft gasps and whispered promises, the sounds of two lonely people finally finding their home in each other. It wasn't just about the physical pleasure, though that was undeniable. It was about the emotional surrender. For the first time, Lorenzo let go of the control he held so tightly. He let her see him, let her hold him, let her love him. Later. The office was quiet. The storm had passed, leaving a heavy, peaceful silence in its wake. Emma was lying on the small leather sofa in the corner of the room, her head resting on Lorenzo's chest. He had covered them with his suit jacket. His arm was wrapped around her. his hand idly tracing patterns on her arm. She could hear the steady, heavy thud of his heart beneath her ear. It was the most comforting sound in the world. Lorenzo took a deep breath, his chest rising and falling. "My father never wanted this for me," he said quietly into the gloom. Emma shifted slightly to look up at him. What did he want? "He wanted me to be an architect," Lorenzo said, a sad smile touching his lips. "He wanted me to build things, not destroy them. But when the Rossi family made their move 20 years ago, he didn't have a choice. And when he died, the crown passed to me." He looked at the ceiling, his eyes distant. "Every choice I have made since then, every alliance, every act of violence, it was just another link in the chain. I thought if I became powerful enough, I could control it. I could keep the family safe. But the power is a trap. Emma, the bigger the empire, the bigger the target." Emma ran her hand over his chest, over the scar that sat just above his heart. "You are not your father," she said, "and you are not the syndicate. You are Lorenzo." Lorenzo tightened his hold on her. "Being with you, it makes me think about things I haven't allowed myself to imagine in years." "Like what?" "Like an exit." He confessed. Emma went still. "An exit? Is that even possible?" Lorenzo looked at her. "It is difficult. It is dangerous. But it is possible. I have been gathering files, evidence, leverage." He paused, as if testing the weight of the words. "I imagine a house," he said softly. "Not like this one. Not a fortress. A normal house. In a quiet neighborhood where the neighbors complain about the lawn, not about the gunshots. A place where I can sleep at night, where you can go to the grocery store without a security detail." It sounded like a dream, a fragile, impossible dream. Emma closed her eyes, picturing it. A small kitchen, a garden, Lorenzo smiling, truly smiling, like the man in the photo in the hidden room. "I want that," she whispered. "I want that for us." Lorenzo kissed the top of her head. "I don't know if I can give it to you," he admitted. "The Rossi cartel is moving. The war is coming, Emma. And before we can even think about leaving, we have to survive." "I don't care about the odds," Emma said, fierce determination rising in her voice. "We will face it together." Lorenzo shifted, looking down at her. His expression was serious, the weight of the world back on his shoulders. But his eyes were clear. "Together," he agreed. They lay there in the darkening room, holding on to each other and their impossible dream, knowing that, outside the door, the wolves were gathering. But for tonight, in the circle of each other's arms, they were safe. And for the first time in a long time, they both had something worth fighting for. The illusion of normalcy was a fragile thing. For the past week, Emma Cole had tried to build a routine within the stone wall of the Moretti estate, clinging to the quiet moments with Lorenzo like a lifeline. But outside the gates, the real world was waiting, impatient and unforgiving. It happened on a Tuesday afternoon. The mansion's chef needed a specific brand of saffron that the bulk suppliers had failed to deliver, and Emma, desperate for a few minutes of fresh air and a feeling of usefulness, had volunteered to run to the gourmet market in downtown Ravensfield. Lorenzo had hesitated, his eyes scanning the perimeter reports, but eventually agreed, assigning a tail car to follow her. The market was bright and smelled of roasted coffee and fresh basil. For 20 minutes, Emma felt like a normal woman again. She picked out the spices, bought a carton of almond milk for herself, and stood in the checkout line, humming a song she had heard on the radio. She walked out into the parking lot, the grocery bags heavy in her arms. The sun was shining. It felt deceptively safe. "Miss Cole?" The voice came from behind her, sharp and authoritative. Emma turned, expecting to see one of Lorenzo's guards. Instead, she faced a man she didn't know. He was wearing a cheap brown suit that had seen better days, and his face was lined with the kind of exhaustion that came from too much coffee and too little sleep. He flashed a badge before she could back away. "Detective Ryan Hale, Ravensfield Police Department. We need to talk." Emma's heart slammed against her ribs. She glanced toward the black SUV where Lorenzo's guards were waiting. 50 feet away. They hadn't noticed him yet. He was standing in her blind spot, shielded by a delivery van. I have nothing to say to you, Emma stammered, gripping the paper bags tighter. I think you do, Hale said, stepping closer. He lowered his voice. We know about the payment to St. Jude's Hospital, $15,000 wired from a shell corporation in the Cayman Islands, a corporation that traces back to Lorenzo Moretti. Emma went cold. The pavement seemed to tilt beneath her feet. I don't know what you are talking about, she whispered, though the tremor in her voice betrayed her. Don't lie to me, Emma, Hale said, well, his tone shifting from professional to pitying. You are a barista. You are drowning in debt. Suddenly, the debt is gone, and you are living in a fortress with the most dangerous man in the city. Do you think we are stupid? He took a step closer. Invading her personal space. That money is laundered. Emma, it is blood money. By accepting it, you have made yourself an accessory to racketeering and money laundering. You are in too deep. Emma took a step back, her back hitting the side of the delivery van. I didn't ask for it. He was just helping my mother. Hale let out a dry, humorless laugh. Men like Moretti don't help people. They buy them. And right now, he owns you. But I can help you get out. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small business card. Wear a wire, he said, pressing the card into her free hand. Get me something I can use. A conversation about a shipment, a confession about the Rossi hits, anything. You help us take him down, and the charges against you disappear. We will protect your mother. And if I don't? Emma asked, her voice barely audible. Hale's eyes hardened. Then you go down with him. And when the feds seize his assets, they will seize the payments to the hospital too. Your mother will be out on the street. The threat hit her like a physical blow. Emma gasped, staring at him with horror. Before she could respond, the sound of heavy car doors slamming shut echoed through the lot. Lorenzo's guards had spotted them. Think about it, Hale hissed. He turned and walked away quickly, blending into the crowd of shoppers before the guards could reach her. Emma stood frozen, the business card burning a hole in her palm. The groceries in her arms felt like lead weights. The sunlight, once warm, now felt glaring and accusatory. When she got back to the mansion, she didn't go to the kitchen. She went straight to Lorenzo's office. He was on a call, standing by the window, but he hung up the moment he saw her face. She was pale, shaking, looking as if she had seen a ghost. Emma? He asked, crossing the room in 3 long strides. What happened? She told him everything. The detective, the knowledge of the hospital bills, the threat to charge her, the wire. As she spoke, Lorenzo's expression shifted from concern to a terrifying, cold fury. He didn't yell. He didn't throw things. He went completely still, his eyes turning into shards of black ice. He threatened you, Lorenzo asked, his voice deceptively soft. He said I was an accomplice, Emma whispered, sitting on the edge of the sofa, wringing her hands. He said the money, he said it was blood money. Lorenzo turned away, pacing the length of the room like a caged tiger. He ran a hand through his hair, his jaw clenched so tight a muscle feathered in his cheek. I should have known they were watching the hospital accounts, he muttered to himself. That was sloppy. He turned back to her. Give me the card. Emma reached into her pocket and handed him the crumpled business card. Lorenzo looked at it for a second, memorizing the name, then crumpled it in his fist. You are not an accomplice, he said firmly. You are an employee. They have nothing on you but circumstantial evidence and intimidation tactics. They are trying to scare you into doing their dirty work because they can't get to me. But what if they are right? Emma asked, looking up at him, tears welling in her eyes. What if I am a criminal now? I took the money. Lorenzo, I am living here. I am sleeping in your bed. I am part of this. Lorenzo froze. The pain in her voice cut through his anger. He walked over and knelt in front of her, taking her cold hands in his. You are not a criminal, Emma. You are a daughter trying to save her mother. Do not let them twist that. But it feels like it, she confessed, a tear slipping down her cheek. I feel like I'm suffocating. Every time I hear a siren, I think they are coming for me. Is this my life now, looking over my shoulder forever? Lorenzo looked at her, and for the first time, She saw a flicker of doubt in his eyes. He had dragged her into his darkness, and now the darkness was staining her. "No," he vowed, "I will fix this. But until I do, you do not leave these gates. Not for groceries. Not for anything. It is not safe out there." Emma nodded, but the instruction felt less like protection and more like a sentence. She was a prisoner in a gilded cage, trapped between the law that wanted to prosecute her and the criminals who wanted to kill her. The next 2 days were a blur of tension. Lorenzo was distant, consumed by meetings with Marco and his security team. Emma spent her time wandering the empty halls, feeling the weight of the silence. She began to question everything. Was love enough to justify this? Was the safety of his arms worth the constant, gnawing fear? On Thursday evening, the atmosphere in the house shifted from defensive to offensive. Marco arrived with a briefcase full of documents, and the door to Lorenzo's office remained shut for hours. When they finally emerged, Lorenzo looked grim. He found Emma in the library, staring unseeingly at a book. "We need to talk," he said. He explained the situation. Intelligence had come in from their informants. The Rossi cartel was planning a decisive strike. They viewed Lorenzo's recent distraction, Emma, as a sign of weakness, and they were preparing to move on his territories. Lorenzo had a legitimate front company that sponsored the Children's Hospital Charity Gala every year. It was a high-profile event, attended by the city's elite, politicians, and press. "It was scheduled for tomorrow night. They expect me to cancel," Lorenzo said, leaning against the bookshelf. "They think I will go to ground. If I do, I lose credibility. The other families will smell blood." "So you are going?" Emma asked, fear spiking in her chest. "I have to," Lorenzo replied. "But we are turning it into a trap. We are increasing security. We have identified the Rossi leaks. We are going to use the gala to flush them out and end this feud once and for all." "And me?" Emma asked. Lorenzo hesitated. He looked at her, his eyes conflicted. "You are coming with me." "What?" Emma stood up, the book sliding from her lap. "You just said it wasn't safe to leave the house. It isn't safe to leave you here either," Lorenzo said. "If they strike the house while my main security force is at the gala, you are vulnerable, and, frankly, Emma, keeping you by my side is the only way I can guarantee your safety. You will attend as my assistant. You will stick to me like a shadow." Emma looked at him. She saw the calculation in his eyes, but she also saw the desperation. He needed her there, not just as a strategic move, but because he couldn't bear to let her out of his sight. "Okay," she whispered, "I will go." The night of the gala arrived with a flurry of activity. A stylist arrived to dress Emma, bringing a garment bag that looked like it cost more than Emma's entire college tuition. The dress was a deep midnight blue, simple but devastatingly elegant. It was cut from silk that rippled like water, with a high neck and a low back. It fit her perfectly. When she stepped out of the dressing room, Lorenzo, who was adjusting the cufflinks of his tuxedo, stopped dead. He stared at her, his expression unreadable for a moment before melting into pure, heated admiration. "You look radiant," he murmured, walking around her. He reached out, fastening a delicate diamond necklace around her throat. His fingers lingered on her skin. "Stay close to me tonight," he whispered against her ear, the warmth of his breath sending a shiver down her spine. "Do not wander." The venue was a massive hotel ballroom in the center of Ravensfield. It was dripping with crystals and gold leaf. Waiters in white gloves circulated with champagne trays, and a string quartet played soft classical music. It was a picture of civilized society. But Emma saw the cracks. She saw the bulges under the suit jackets of the men standing by the exits. She saw the way Lorenzo scanned the room every few seconds, his eyes dissecting every movement. They walked in together. Cameras flashed, blinding and rapid. Lorenzo placed his hand on the small of her back. It was a possessive, claiming gesture. To the press, it looked like a boss guiding his assistant. To anyone paying attention, it was a declaration of war. She is mine. Touch her and die. Emma smiled until her cheeks hurt. She shook hands with politicians who looked at her with polite indifference and rival businessmen who looked at her with shark-like curiosity. She felt exposed, a gazelle walking through a pride of lions. An hour into the event, the air in the ballroom became stifling. The mix of expensive perfume, nervous sweat, and the sheer weight of the tension made Emma dizzy. "I need a glass of water," she whispered to Lorenzo. "I will get it," he said immediately. "No, please," Emma insisted, needing just a moment of space. "I will go to the bar. I will be right there. I can see you from the bar." Lorenzo hesitated, then nodded once. 2 minutes. Emma wove through the crowd, heading toward the side of the room where a service bar was set up. It was crowded. She slipped past a group of laughing women and ducked into a quiet hallway marked service only, intending to find a water cooler or just a moment of silence. The hallway was dim and smelled of cleaning products. Emma leaned against the wall, taking a deep breath, trying to slow her racing heart. Voices drifted from around the corner. Rough, hushed voices. "The detonator is set for 10 o'clock. Emma froze. "Are you sure the structural pillars will hold long enough for us to get out?" another voice asked. "Who cares?" the first voice sneered. "The point is to bring the concrete down on the parking levels. We bury the cars. We bury the guests leaving early. We blame it on Moretti's negligence. The explosion will look like a gas leak." Emma pressed a hand over her mouth, her eyes wide with horror. They weren't just planning a hit, they were planning a massacre. Dozens of innocent people, waiters, drivers, guests, would be in that parking structure. She had to tell Lorenzo. She turned to slip back toward the ballroom, her heels silent on the carpet, going somewhere. "Sweetheart?" A hand clamped down on her upper arm like a vice. Emma gasped. Spinning around, a large man in a waiter's uniform was standing there, but the smile on his face wasn't serving staff polite. It was predatory. He was one of the men she had seen in the surveillance photos Marco had shown Lorenzo. An enforcer for the Rossi cartel? He recognized her instantly. "Well, look at this." He grinned. "The pretty maid. The boss said you might be here." Emma opened her mouth to scream, but he was faster. He shoved her backward into a maintenance closet, following her in and kicking the door shut. She swung her purse at him, hitting him in the face, but he just laughed. He grabbed her wrists with one hand, pinning them behind her back. "You're not just a maid, are you?" he hissed, leaning close. "You are the bait we needed." He pulled a rag from his pocket. It smelled sickly sweet. Chloroform. Emma struggled, kicking out, landing a blow on his shin. He grunted but didn't let go. He pressed the rag over her nose and mouth. "Lorenzo!" She tried to scream, but the sound was muffled. The world tilted. The darkness rushed in from the edges of her vision. The last thing she thought of was Lorenzo's face and the promise she had made to stay close. In the ballroom, Lorenzo checked his watch. 3 minutes. He looked at the bar. She wasn't there. A cold stone dropped into his stomach. He scanned the crowd, his height giving him an advantage. No midnight blue dress, no dark hair. Marco. He spoke into the microphone concealed in his cuff. "Do you have eyes on Emma?" A pause. Then Marco's voice, tight with tension. "Negative. She is not on the floor." Lorenzo began to move. He didn't run. That would cause a panic. But he cut through the crowd with a terrifying speed. He reached the service hallway where the guard station there was supposed to be. The guard was gone. Lorenzo kicked open the door to the hallway. It was empty. His phone buzzed. He pulled it out. An unknown number. A picture loaded on the screen. It was Emma. She was bound to a wooden chair in what looked like a warehouse. Her head was lolling forward, unconscious. There was a bruise forming on her cheek. Beneath the photo, a simple text. "Trade yourself, or we break her first. 401 Dockside. Alone." The world narrowed down to the size of that screen. The noise of the gala, the laughter, the music, the clinking glasses faded into a dull roar. Lorenzo stared at the image. His vision went red. The rage that exploded in his chest was not the cold, calculating anger of a businessman. It was the primal, destructive fury of a monster whose heart had been torn out. Marco appeared at his elbow. "Boss?" Lorenzo looked up. His face was a mask of death. They have her, Marco cursed. We lock down the exits. We find them. She is not here, Lorenzo said, his voice void of all humanity. They took her. They want me. He shoved the phone at Marco. Clear the room, Lorenzo ordered. Call in a bomb threat. Call in a gas leak. I don't care. Get these people out, now. What are you going to do? Marco asked, looking at the photo. I am going to get her back, Lorenzo said. He turned and strode toward the private exit. Marco followed him. It is a trap, Lorenzo. You know it is a trap. If you go to that warehouse, you are dead. I don't care, Lorenzo snarled. Spinning around, he grabbed Marco by the lapels of his tuxedo. I don't care if the whole city burns. I am not abandoning her. He released Marco and stormed out the back door, into the cool night air. Lorenzo tore out of the parking lot in his personal car, a sleek, high-performance coupe. He ignored the speed limits. He ignored the red lights. He drove with a singular, terrifying focus. The warehouse district was 20 minutes away. He would make it in 10. His hands gripped the leather steering wheel so tightly the leather creaked. He could still see the picture in his mind. Emma. Bound. Emma. Bruised. Emma. Alone in the dark because of him. He had promised to protect her. He had failed. Guilt. Acid hot and heavy. Burned in his throat. He had been so arrogant, and he thought he could have it all, the power and the girl. He thought he could keep his war separate from his heart. He reached under the passenger seat and pulled out a heavy handgun. He checked the magazine. Full. He placed it on the seat beside him. Hold on, Emma, he whispered to the empty car. He thought about the way she looked at him in the morning. He thought about her laugh. He thought about the impossible dream of a quiet house and a normal life. They were going to take that from him. The Rossi cartel was going to take the only light he had ever known and snuff it out. Not tonight. Lorenzo pressed the accelerator to the floor. The engine roared like a beast in pain. If they hurt her, he promised the night, if they touched one hair on her head, he would not just kill them, he would erase them. He would tear their world apart, brick by brick, until there was nothing left but dust. He would get her out, even if it cost him his empire, even if it cost him his life. The warehouse loomed ahead, a dark stain against the skyline. Lorenzo didn't slow down. He checked the gun one last time, his eyes cold and dead as the grave. He was coming for her, and God help anyone who stood in his way. Consciousness returned to Emma slowly, accompanied by the throbbing ache in her temples and the smell of stale dust and gasoline. She blinked, her vision swimming in the harsh glare of an overhead halogen light. She tried to move her hands, but they were bound tightly behind her back, the rough rope digging into her wrists. She was sitting in a wooden chair in the center of a cavernous warehouse. Shadows stretched long and menacing from the stacks of shipping crates that lined the walls. Welcome back, Sleeping Beauty. Emma snapped her head up. 3 men were circling her. She recognized the man who had spoken. He was the fake waiter from the gala, the one who had dragged her into the dark. He was smiling, a cruel expression that didn't reach his eyes. You are smaller than I expected, another man sneered, leaning against a crate. He was older, with a scar running down his cheek. I don't know what Moretti sees in you. A maid, in a world this big. He picks a girl who scrubs toilets. Emma straightened her spine, ignoring the fear that made her stomach churn. She looked the older man in the eye. He picked me because I am loyal, she said, her voice shaking but defiant, something you wouldn't understand. The men laughed, the sound echoing off the metal roof. Loyalty doesn't stop bullets. Sweetheart, the fake waiter said. He leaned in close, smelling of sweat and cheap tobacco. Do you really think he's coming for you? He is a businessman. He will cut his losses. You are just a liability. He is coming, Emma stated, the conviction in her voice surprising even herself. And when he gets here, you will wish you had never touched me. As if summoned by her words, the metal side door of the warehouse creaked open. The laughter died instantly. The men spun around, weapons raised. Lorenzo Moretti stood in the doorway. He was alone. He had shed his tuxedo jacket, his white shirt glowing in the dim light. His hands were raised empty above his head. He looked calm, almost bored. But Emma could see the tension radiating from him, a coiled spring ready to snap. "I heard you were looking for me," Lorenzo called out, his voice steady and projecting across the vast space. The older man, the leader of this cell, stepped forward, leveling a pistol at Lorenzo's chest. "Alone?" the leader asked skeptically. "I didn't want to spook you," Lorenzo said, walking slowly into the room. He kept his eyes fixed on the leader, deliberately not looking at Emma, though she knew he had clocked her position, her injuries, and the number of men guarding her in a single glance. "If I brought my army, you would have killed the girl, and I want the girl back." Marco DeLuca was nowhere to be seen, but Emma knew he was there. She knew he was in the shadows, waiting for a signal. The leader sneered. "You think you can just walk in here and take her? The price has gone up. Moretti, we want the docks, we want the distribution routes for the entire East Coast, and we want the codes to your offshore accounts." Lorenzo stopped 10 feet away. He lowered his hands slowly, keeping them visible. "That is a high price for a housekeeper," Lorenzo remarked coolly. The leader laughed. "We both know she is not just a housekeeper." Lorenzo finally looked at Emma. His mask slipped for a fraction of a second, revealing a depth of pain and rage that took her breath away. In that look, she saw the truth. He wasn't here to negotiate. He wasn't here for business. He was here to burn the world down for her. He looked back at the leader. "You want the accounts?" Lorenzo asked. "Fine. I will give you the accounts, but first, you cut her loose." The leader shook his head. "No deal. Money first, then the girl." Lorenzo sighed. Shifting his weight, he tapped his fingers against his thigh in a rhythmic pattern. 1, 2, 3. "You're making a mistake," Lorenzo said softly. The leader cocked his gun. "The only mistake was you coming here alone." Lorenzo smiled, and it was the most terrifying thing Emma had ever seen. "Who said I was alone?" Lorenzo dropped to the floor just as the high windows of the warehouse shattered inward. Smoke canisters hissed through the air, landing in the center of the room and erupting into thick, white clouds. At the same moment, the side doors were kicked open. Marco and a tactical team surged in, their movements precise and lethal. The warehouse exploded into chaos. Gunfire erupted, deafening and rapid. The Rossi men scrambled for cover, firing blindly into the smoke. Emma screamed as the chair she was tied to was knocked sideways in the scramble. She hit the concrete hard, her shoulder taking the brunt of the impact. "Lorenzo!" she cried out, coughing in the acrid smoke. "I am coming!" His voice roared through the haze. She saw a shadow moving through the smoke, not running away from the danger, but sprinting directly into the center of it. Lorenzo was moving with a singular focus, ignoring the bullets chipping the concrete around him. The fake waiter, the enforcer who had taken her, loomed out of the smoke. He grabbed Emma by the arm, hauling her and the chair upright. "You are coming with me," he growled, dragging her toward the back exit. "No!" Emma yelled, digging her heels into the ground. The man raised his gun to pistol whip her, but before the blow could land, a blur of white and black collided with him. Lorenzo tackled the man, driving him into a stack of crates. The gun clattered to the floor. The two men hit the ground, a tangle of fists and fury. The enforcer was large, but Lorenzo was fighting with the desperation of a man possessed. He landed a sickening crunch of a punch to the man's jaw, but the enforcer shoved him back and scrambled for the loose gun. Emma saw the weapon spinning across the concrete. She didn't think. She didn't hesitate. She threw herself forward, swinging her legs, and kicked the gun with all her might. It skittered away into the darkness, under a forklift. The enforcer roared in frustration and lunged at Emma, pulling a knife from his belt. Lorenzo threw himself between them. He wrapped his arms around Emma, shielding her with his own body. Emma felt the heavy thud of the impact as the enforcer collided with Lorenzo's back. Lorenzo grunted, a sharp sound of pain, as the hilt of the knife slammed into his ribs. "Marco!" Lorenzo shouted. 2 shots rang out. The enforcer collapsed, falling away from them. Lorenzo didn't check to see if the man was dead. He immediately spun around, his hands frantic as he checked Emma. "Are you hurt? Did he touch you?" "I am okay," Emma sobbed, seeing the blood blooming on the side of Lorenzo's white shirt. "You are bleeding." "It is nothing." Lorenzo gasped, wincing as he pulled a knife from his belt to slice the ropes binding her wrists. "Just a scratch. We have to move." He hauled her up, keeping her tucked against his uninjured side. They scrambled behind a wall of heavy crates just as a fresh volley of bullets chewed up the floor where they had been standing. They crouched in the darkness, the sounds of the firefight raging around them. In the distance, the wail of sirens began to rise, getting louder by the second. Emma leaned her head back against the wood, her chest heaving. She looked at the blood on Lorenzo's shirt, at the chaos, at the men trying to kill them. The reality of it crushed her. "It is too much." "Lorenzo," she whispered, her voice breaking. "This life, it is too big. I can't take it anymore." Lorenzo looked at her. His face was streaked with soot and sweat, but his eyes were clear. He reached out, cupping her face with trembling hands. "I know," he said intensely. "I know. This is the last time. Emma, I swear to you." He looked toward the entrance, where the sirens were now deafening. "I have a plan," he revealed, his words rushing out. "The files in the hidden room, the evidence I have been gathering. I didn't just keep it for leverage. I sent it to a contact in the Federal Bureau this morning." Emma stared at him. "You what?" "I traded it," Lorenzo said. "The Rossi cartel, my own organization, the routes, the names. I gave them everything, in exchange for immunity, in exchange for a way out. But," Emma stammered, "if you give them that, your enemies will kill you." Lorenzo gave her a sad, crooked smile. "That is why I have to die tonight." What?" Before she could ask more, the main doors of the warehouse were rammed open by an armored vehicle. Voices amplified by megaphones boomed through the space. "Federal agents, drop your weapons." The Rossi men, confused and outgunned, began to surrender or scatter. Lorenzo looked at Emma. "This is the part where you trust me." He kissed her hard, a brief, desperate seal of a promise. Then he stood up. He walked out from behind the crates, his hands raised. "I am unarmed," Lorenzo shouted. Emma watched from the shadows as heavily armed agents swarmed him. They didn't shoot. They moved with a strange, choreographed precision. They handcuffed him, shielding him from view, and hustled him toward a black van that was separate from the police cruisers. As the van sped away, Marco appeared beside Emma. He gently guided her toward a paramedic team. "Is he—" Emma started. "He's gone," Marco said loudly, "for the benefit of the nearby officers. He didn't make it, but he squeezed her shoulder, a silent signal." Emma watched the flashing lights, tears streaming down her face. To the world. Lorenzo Moretti died in a shootout that night, but Emma knew better. He hadn't died. He had just walked through the fire to get to the other side. 8 months later, the ocean breeze was salty and cool, carrying the scent of pine and brine. The small coastal town was the kind of place that didn't appear on most maps, a cluster of weathered cottages clinging to the edge of the Pacific Northwest. Emma walked up the gravel path, her legs tired from a long shift at the local bakery. The air here was different. It was quiet. There were no sirens, no gunshots, only the cry of seagulls and the rhythmic crash of the waves. She reached the small blue house at the end of the lane. A bicycle was leaned against the porch railing. She opened the front door and was greeted by the smell of garlic and roasting rosemary. "I am home," she called out, "in the kitchen." A man turned around. He was wearing a faded t-shirt and jeans. His hair was longer now, softer, no longer slicked back in a severe style. He wore an apron that was tied slightly crooked at the waist. It was Lorenzo, or, as the town knew him, Leo. "Hey," he said, a smile breaking across his face. It was a real smile, one that reached his eyes and stayed there, and he looked human. The sharp edges of the Wolf of Ravensfield had been worn down by the sea air and the quiet routine of a life lived without looking over his shoulder. He worked at a boat repair shop now, his hands stained with engine grease instead of blood. Emma walked over to him. She wrapped her arms around his waist from behind, pressing her cheek against his broad back. She could feel the steady, strong beat of his heart. "Dinner is almost ready," he said, covering her hands with his. "I missed you," she murmured into his shirt. "I was here," he replied softly. "I am always here." He turned in her arms, drying his hands on a towel. He looked down at her with an expression of profound peace. He leaned down, and they shared a slow, tender kiss. It wasn't desperate like the warehouse. It wasn't stolen like the office. It was a kiss of belonging. It was slow and deep, his hands resting respectfully on her waist, hers rising to touch the hair at the nape of his neck. Every touch was layered with history, with the memory of the bullets they had dodged and the empire they had burned to be here. They broke apart but didn't let go. "How was work?" Lorenzo asked. "Busy," Emma said. "The espresso machine broke. I thought about fixing it, but I figured I would leave the engineering to you." Lorenzo chuckled, a sound she never got tired of hearing. They ate dinner on the worn couch in the living room, the windows open to let in the sound of the ocean. They didn't talk much. They didn't need to. The silence wasn't heavy anymore. It was companionable. After they finished, Emma leaned her head on his shoulder, watching the dust motes dance in the fading evening light. She thought about the mansion, the bulletproof glass, the endless, echoing hallways that had felt so cold. "It feels right here," she whispered. Lorenzo took her hand, lacing his fingers through hers. He looked around the small room, at the peeling paint on the windowsill and the second-hand rug on the floor. "It is small," he said. Emma squeezed his hand. "It is perfect." Lorenzo kissed her knuckles, his thumb brushing over her skin, the same gesture he had used that first night in his office. But now, it carried no threat, only promise. "I meant what I said, Emma," he whispered, his voice rough with emotion. "I would walk through every fire again. I would burn it all down 1,000 times if it meant ending up here. With you," Emma looked up at him, her eyes shining. "You don't have to anymore. We are home." Lorenzo pulled her into his arms, holding her tight against his chest. It was a powerful embrace, grounding and absolute. Outside. The sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of gold and violet. They had survived the darkness. They had paid the price. And now, in the quiet ordinariness of a small house by the sea, they had found the only thing that truly mattered. They had found each other. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I hope you enjoyed the journey of Emma and Lorenzo. Please leave a comment down below and let me know where you are listening from. I love seeing how far these stories travel. If you enjoyed this series, please make sure to subscribe to Mafia Romance Stories for more emotional and thrilling tales. Don't forget to share your thoughts in the comments in English. I read every single one. See you in the next story.